unknown friends. This is an introductory video for anyone going from tropical astrology into sidereal astrology and struggling to understand how when their placements shift, how could it possibly both be describing the same person. So this video is aimed at reconciling that. What we typically do when we look at a tropical chart, when we want to understand something about the person, is we will look at their ascendant, their sun, and their moon, which ultimately would describe their persona, their logic, and their emotions. We see where they sit in sign, and by the quality of that sign description is how we start to understand that particular chart point, and we apply that to the person. We gain a nice understanding of who that person is and what they represent and how they might behave. When we go to sidereal, we see all the points change enough to be significant, and in many cases, a planet will move to a new house or sign, completely changing the story that you've defined from the tropical zodiac. And this can definitely be a setback for anybody new who doesn't understand that there's other parameters that come into reading a Vedic astrology chart and a sidereal chart. It came from a different time, and it has different aims and perspectives, so there's also different tactics and rules of play about how you go and address things. Now, if we look at the tropical placements, we're very identified with those, we're very familiar. But when we flip over to sidereal placements, because things move, in the case of the example of the ascendant, it switches signs. So, pretty much we're going to have this sort of look on our faces when that happens and try to reconcile what that means. When we look at the sun, in this case, luckily enough, it was late enough in degree when we dialed it over to sidereal placement. It's still in the same sign of Capricorn. So in this case, we wouldn't get so perplexed, but the moon, again, changes its situation, changes its flavor, and it just does not compute. So this video hopefully will shed some light on that. This is the general reaction that we all have. I think if we reflect back to when we first, broached this topic, we can all agree this is how you feel. Very frustrating, doesn't make sense, time to move on. Guess Vedic astrology doesn't work. But there's a twist here. If we continue reading past just the sign placement of each planet, and we look to the nakshatra, or the constellation that sits behind each sign, and then the section within the nakshatra that is subdivided, known as a pada, we start to really get some extra color that isn't available in tropical astrology. So just to put an illustration behind this, the 27 nakshatras shown here, because there's an uneven count of nakshatra, there's going to be an odd overlap, so there's usually about 3 per sign, 2 full and a partial, and then in between every water and fire sign, there's actually a point where the cusps of the signs and the nakshatra line up exactly evenly, and this is known as Gandanta, which we'll talk about in another video series. So we have the 27 nakshatra that also get included to the 12 signs that we know from tropical astrology. And then those 27 nakshatra get sliced into 4 even segments that are 3 degrees and 20 minutes each. And those are the padas, also known as feet. And then beyond the padas are actually 9 subdivisions of the signs, which turn out to equal the same degree of arc, 3 degrees and 20 minutes. So therefore, the Navamshas act as rulers over the padas and are really seen as analogous. Actually, the Navamsha chart, which we'll get into in another video, marries the nakshatras with the rasis, or the sign chart. So here are the Navamsha here. So there's definitely more flavor that we can add, and each one brings in something new. As shown here, the sun sign tells temperament, the nakshatra tells mind, mindset, creativity, and the pada tells the purushathas. Dharma is going to be a person that's driven by righteous living. Artha is going to be somebody who is wealth-driven. Kama is somebody who is pleasure-seeking, and moksha is somebody who is seeking spiritual liberation. So if you know what pada within each nakshatra your planet sits, as well as the sign, now you have the full artillery of what you need to read a sidereal chart. So how you would go about doing this is you would find what you already know from tropical astrology, that the sun sign in this example is 15 degrees Aquarius right here. And all we would do is just trace that up into its nakshatra, which is Shatabisha. So we can look up a description for Shatabisha through web search. And then also you would just continue to follow that up and recognize that it's in Pada 3, which also has a description. And if you're looking at your Navamsha chart, which is a separate chart, a divisional chart called a Varga, you would follow that even further to see who the ruler of that Pada was, which is Aquarius. And you could actually combine, in this case, you would see it's actually a super dose of Aquarius, because your sun would be in Aquarius both in your Rasi chart, your natal chart, but also in your D9 Navamsha chart, which rules over the third Pada of Shatabisha. So all these things combined gives a full definition of the native, and also adds a lot more color than just the tropical placement of looking in the sign itself. And just to have a handy guide here, if you want, just pause the video in this last frame, look up each of your chart points, and check by degree here to figure out which of your nakshatras are pertinent. And then you can go look them up on Google, and I will include some links in the description below of some great sites that have excellent descriptions so that you can learn a lot more about your chart in Sidereal astrology. Hope this was a great help. Thank you for dropping in. Hope to see you soon.